So now let's look at heat sealing. I'm going to use some black 210D, and I'll start with some yellow 40D. I'm using black and yellow just because it shows up best, the contrast between them, and you can actually kind of see through the yellow a bit. This is my heat sealing iron. It's the Coverite Black Baron heat sealing iron, and you can see I've got the temperature turned up pretty high. So I kind of use a back and forth motion, working a small area generally. The nice thing about the yellow and the lighter colors is that you can actually see when it's heat sealing, because it'll darken like that. It kind of looks wet. So if you're doing a narrow strip along the edge, for example, you can just use the edge of the iron like that. Try and avoid heat sealing any bubbles into it by just working outwards from a central point. If you're doing a wide area like this, generally what I do is I'll heat a small area and then just press on it for a few seconds while it cools down. That keeps it flat and keeps it compressed while the TPU from this piece of fabric welds to the TPU on this piece of fabric. And you have to wait for it to cool before you test it, but you can see here that I can't actually pull these apart no matter how hard I try. It's tearing a little bit right there, just because I'm focusing all the tension right there, but it's not actually coming apart. So if you're doing a larger area, obviously you can use the flat of the iron. And if you do that too much, it'll seal air in there. So what I'm doing is I'm kind of heating it up and then tilting it up, and then I'm using this back part to just squeeze the air out that way. You might get a couple of bubbles here and there, but that's not the end of the world, because you got all this area. Ooh, hot. Don't burn yourself. Right now I'm using just the heel of the iron to get right back to this edge here. And you can see if the edge of the iron touches the exposed TPU there, it kind of turns it this shinier color, but it doesn't actually damage it. And then that edge there is it's heat sealed right up to the edge. So that was heat sealing the 40D fabric to 210D, and that's pretty easy, goes pretty quickly. Let's try some 210 to 210. I'll just use the same piece so you can compare them directly. Try and turn it so the light is a bit better. Same sort of thing. I'm using the edge of the iron to get right up to the edge there without heating up the other areas at first. I'm actually going over the edge a little bit, but I'm not touching the piece below, or I'm doing my best not to. And you can see it kind of wants to lift up, so I'm pressing down on it as it cools. Just for, it only takes a few seconds, but now it's solidified. The TPU layers have solidified, so it's and it has that wet look. But that part is not, that's on the inside of your Packraft, so you're not really going to see that color change once you're finished the boat. I'm just going to iron the rest of it. You can see it's, you get these kind of air pocket areas, and you just have to kind of work those out by working them towards the edge of your piece. It's looking pretty good. I'm pressing on it to allow it to cool with the pieces nice and tight together. So I haven't gone right up to the edge. I don't know if you can see that through there. I haven't done that part yet, but let's just see. You have to wait for it to cool before testing how strong the weld is, because obviously if it's too hot, it's going to be not fully set and it'll be weak. It's still pretty warm, but it's really hard to pull apart, and yeah, that's kind of what you want to see if you're dialing in the temperature of your iron. You want the TPU to peel away from both sides. That means both layers are activating properly. They're bonding together and forming a single layer that's either peeling off of this piece and being stuck onto this piece, or peeling off of this piece and being stuck onto this piece. Whereas originally there were two separate layers of TPU, one on this piece and one on this piece. Now they're a single layer that's bonded so strongly that if you rip them apart, it's going to be stuck to one side or the other. And it's best if it's coming kind of on both, because it means it's bonded to both pieces of fabric equally strongly. And you know, I can pull this apart, but that's a very narrow strip on a, you know, the boat is designed so that you're actually, tension is applied over a long strip, and there's no way that you could pull that apart. So to go right up to the edge there, you just have to be a little bit careful not to go too far, but you can overhang it a little bit. I'm using the edge of the iron here and mostly pressing right there. And if you're worried about going over, you can put down a piece of parchment paper. It's just baking paper from your local grocery store. So you can actually press right up to and over the edge a little bit. Press on it nice and hard as it sets, and it's a beautiful looking. This would be on the outside. Looks quite nice. If you heat up the fabric, There's no reason why you would want to do this, but I'm just showing you what the parchment paper does. If you heat that up, it does leave a mark, but it's not sticking to this. This is silicone coated. So it leaves a mark, but it's not actually damaging it because it's left intact. So that's why I like to use this, just in case I accidentally, if I'm working on something here and the tip is touching, it's not going to ruin the fabric piece. So let's show you how strong a wider weld is. So that's about 10 centimeters wide or something. So what I'm going to do is I'll just seal these two together quickly here. Pressing really hard with this thing. Pushing down. Heating the whole area and then tilting it up so I can really press with the heel of the iron, working out any air bubbles. Still a few bubbles there. If they're close to the edge, I can work them out. I'm not going to waste time on it though, because this is just a piece of scrap. So I'm going to let it cool. What I am going to do though is get a nice weld right up to the edge, because that's where all of our force is going to be applied. So I'm getting a relatively straight line across here, pressing down with the iron quite firmly. And then pressing on the fabric, letting it cool down. Now that's the edge I'm going to be testing, but I do want this to cool down before I pull on it. So it's relatively cool to the touch. And now I am pulling as hard as I can and trying not to hurt myself, but pulling as hard as I can, and it's not even opening up at all. It's extremely tough when you've got that force distributed over even 10 centimeters. The peel strength is quite impressive. So that's with the 210D. Let's try the same thing with the 40D. Try and do similar size pieces here. Let's try red and green, since Christmas is coming. Just doing a shoddy job here because I'm trying to be quick, but you'll notice that the lighter fabric is quite quick to seal because it's thinner and heat transfers through it more quickly. So I'm not bothering about these bubbles right now because this is just a quick demonstration, but the part that matters is this edge where all the force is going to be applied. And I'm kind of going over onto the piece below, and it's, I don't know if you can see this, but it is kind of marking up the TPU a little bit. But this is a non-stick surface, and it doesn't really collect on the iron very much. So pressing on that, smoothing it out as it cools down. There's still some bubbles in there, but I don't care. So now I'm just waving this around to help it cool down faster. And now we have a seam there. It's reasonably straight. And let's just see how strong it is. You can see it. Yeah, it's not quite as strong as the 210D, but I really had to pull hard on that to get it to come apart. And that's only about 10 centimeters or 4 inches. But on a Packraft, all the force is going to be distributed over much longer distances, so it's going to be even stronger, a lot stronger than that actually. So when heat sealing the 210D to the 420D or the 1000D, it's basically similar. Let's just do a quick demo of that. Here takes a little bit longer. Just because the fabrics are thicker, but so I'm moving it back and forth. You can see that it's kind of trapping some air under there, so now I'm using the heel of the iron to work that air out as much as possible. If you get a few little bubbles, it's not a big deal. You can see where I touch it on there, it kind of makes it shiny, but it's not damaging that fabric at all. Just going to use that as a weight to keep it from curling up, because it does want to curl a little bit when it's hot. So I'm pressing and working out any bubbles, and then this is pretty key, is you want to really push on it as it's cooling down. That'll keep any bubbles from forming if it's too hot. It'll keep it nice and flat and smooth as it cools down. Just kind of doing a quick job here, but so you can see that I'm doing like the main part of this first, and not right up to the edge quite yet. If this was something that I cared about, I would spend some time going right to the edge here, and then I'm also going to work towards the edge here. And now I'm doing it with the edge of the iron because this part's already welded, and if I work up to this edge with the whole foot of the iron, it's going to reheat this and it'll start to lift off. So I'm actually I'm using the edge of the iron, and I'm actually going slightly over the edge of the bottom piece of fabric, but trying not to heat over the edge too much. You can see it still looks good there. It's not heated through to this side at all. May as well go right to the edge there. So I left a couple of bubbles in there, but in the grand scheme of this whole piece, that's maybe, I don't know, 1/1000th of the area here, so it's not really going to affect the strength very much. And I'm still, pushing on this as it cools. I'm going to do another little quick peel test here. If you heat it for too long, you could melt through, but you can see all that heat sealing. I haven't melted this or this TPU at all. So, almost ready for a peel strength test here. Now this piece is quite a bit thinner than, where's that other one that we just did? It's quite a bit thinner than this one. It's about half as thin, so I'll probably be able to peel it, but we'll see. Just gonna let it cool down a bit. You'll notice that if you don't let it cool down, you can peel it no matter how good your seals are. So I'm literally pulling as hard as I can. And you can see that it's trying to peel, but it's not actually breaking the TPU at all. So that was the 210D and the 420. And the 1000D should be basically the same, but let's give it a try. Yeah, I'll just seal right over the damaged area. I'll pretend I'm fixing it. Fixing a puncture. Try and get the shadows out of there for you. Now I'm pressing on that as it cools a bit. I haven't done a very straight line there, so anytime you don't have a straight line, any force is going to be focused on those peaks there, so you want to get it as straight as possible. But for this test, I don't really care. And I'll just show you the difference between the lighter fabrics and the darker fabrics. when you're heat sealing the darker, in this case green, you don't really get that wet look as much. So if you're looking for that, you won't see it. You can see a slight darkening. I don't know if you can see it on camera, but basically for the darker colors, you just have to practice, and you'll just get the feel of when it's sealed. And obviously dial in your temperature by working on scraps of fabric before you start to make your Packraft. So I've just been heating this from the other side as well, so I'm going to let it cool down a bit before I pull on it. Maybe that's enough. So that's about 2 inches or 5 centimeters. And again, I am pulling as hard as I can. And there's no way that I can pull that apart. It's extremely strong. And this one's even wider, so I expect it to be even harder to pull apart. And indeed, there's nothing I can do to get those apart. So, yeah, there you go.